And we're live. As the more observant of you viewers, or 0 of you at the moment, but who knows, might have observed, we have a different co-host for today, which is Making.
Hi, how you
doing? So today we have the amazing Ashley Graham, who is he's the most famous PR-related Ashley Graham in the world. And has been confused a lot with others, but let's focus on you first. So can you briefly say who you are and who the non-famous person, who the famous person is that you get mistaken for all the time?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm Ashley Graham, the publicist. I am all things PR for thought leaders and helping you get recognized in influential outlets depending on your story and what it is that you have to express in the media. But on the other end of Ashley Graham, I have been mistaken for the model Ashley Graham online a number of times, which we don't look alike. So I don't really know exactly like how that happens. But I think when you're talking about like keywords and search terms, like I think that's like where things can get kind of crossed. But I was telling you both before we hit live about the random one where I invested in a friend's I Fund Women campaign and I got a personalized message. It was so sweet. The whole thing was very endearing and just, I love those things. But they started the message as, if you're who we think you are, oh my gosh, exclamation mark. And if you're not, still, oh my gosh. And I was on the floor rolling. I was like, oh my gosh, that's probably the most unique way that I think I've been maybe mistaken for a different Ashley Graham, but I don't know. It's just become kind of like a recurring joke now that I live for, because it's like, oh, I mean, we're obviously connected by some degree of separation, and I will meet her one day. Mark my words.
So, I think did you write a blog post about your link with the other Ashley Graham? Am I making up that memory? I think you did. Or have you've made use of that from a publicity point of view before, haven't you?
Yes, actually, I know exactly what you're referring to, and I didn't necessarily write it around a blog post, but I am a contributing writer for Thrive Global, and there is a whole process that I talked about in my stories. And again, I bring humor to everything, especially from the online side, because I mean, there's always errors and technicalities that can happen, even if you think that your system is completely perfect. And so signing up to be a contributing writer for Thrive Global, you do have to go through these kind of standard criteria of putting your name, your email, your phone, giving them actual sample writing examples from the past, just to show that, you know, you do have, you know, structured writing capabilities and things of that nature. But I don't know if it was something on the back end, but I got approved. This was sometime pre-COVID, I think, early like March or April of last year. And when I logged into the dashboard to go and write my first article, there was already an article in the dashboard, and it was written around Ashley Graham, the model. I was like, how does that happen? Like, I had to send in headshots and I had to send in writing and my email. Like, you could definitely tell, like, I am not Ashley Graham. But then they associated me with that article, and I was like, is that coincidental? I don't think anything's really coincidence at the end of the day, but that was one of the more unique ones that I was like, okay, it definitely could be system error, but
But anyway, we're not here to talk about the Ashley Graham body positive, incredible model. We're here to talk about the Ashley Graham when it comes to PR and thought leadership. Now, let's start with the basics, shall we, Ashley? What does thought leadership mean to you?
Yeah, so thought leadership, from my perspective, and I always lean into my perspective of things, is thought leadership is kind of the thoughts and expressions that we have as individuality and what makes us unique as people. And thought leadership on the public side, and this is kind of where it transitions into PR, is it's basically using your lived experiences from your perspectives, your opinions, your perceptions things that you have maybe evolved through as a person or as a leader, depending on what your identity is, and how you can use those observations and those opinions and perspectives as a way to connect with other audiences who are directly connected or aligned with your perspectives. And again, that's where a lot of the thought leadership comes from.
So what are the unique challenges then of doing PR in terms of a thought leadership role as opposed to just general PR? I mean, I suppose we should define what PR is. I remember doing a Twitter chat once where I put PR in the title and people were like, what's PR mean? So you can kind of say what PR is and then what the specific issues are to do with PR for thought leadership.
Yeah, so taking it down to the bare basics, PR stands for public relations. And so the traditional PR sense is it's working with an organization or an entity on getting public recognition based around their organizational model, what they sell, what they promote, heavily in the kind of like that corporate structure. But I think where digital PR and innovative PR, as well as thought leadership PR, is you just necessarily have to be kind of a larger corporation that's taking over, mass media. You can be an entrepreneur, you can be a small business owner, you can be a mom and pop shop, and you can be a thought leader and also deserve and take recognition, public recognition, in the way that is directly aligned on how you're bringing those audiences to connect with the story. So that's just kind of like where I feel that traditional PR and thought leadership PR, it's still kind of the same inner workings on like processes and how you're doing the outreach. But thought PR, I think you have a little bit more creative control to bring a little bit more glamour and allure to the story versus being very kind of like structured and by the book on, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, things of that nature, which it's kind of like the same thing over and over again. Where thought leadership PR, I mean, you can have an experience and talk about the transformation or the observation that you perceived through that experience, and you can use that as a way to pitch it to the media to talk about that conversation or to take it further.
Amazing. Now, you talked about how, entrepreneurs, business owners, mom and pop stores, anybody can use Embrace PR to showcase that they are a thought leader in their industry. How does one get started? $1 million question.
There's so many different ways to get started, and I think I'll always just come down again like the easiest, simplest thing that you can do. And a lot of this comes through kind of like the confidence and the mindset part of what I do. And I have this whole connection between public relations and people relations. And again, if you're a thought leader, you're a person. Like your brand is operated solely through you as a person and how you connect with your ideal client, your audiences online. And one of the simplest things that you can do is just kind of muster up enough of that confidence and the courage just to show up for yourself. And as we were talking before we hit live, like even just agreeing to getting on a social media live show like this is a part of PR in a sense that you are coming on to talk about a story and to promote yourself. But instead of being like, here's a guided presentation with 5 structural things, then here's how you can connect with me. Like it's just brings a little bit more of that personalized connection versus selling, which I think people also mistaken PR to be, because PR is not advertising. And there's a quote that's coming up in the back of my mind that, advertising is getting somebody to tell or getting oh my gosh, I'm getting like sidetracked. I'm like trying to remember verbatim and it's not coming up for me.
We need to put a little asterisk on the right. We'll fill it in the after show on YouTube.
I love accuracy, and that's definitely a Publicist thing, but I'm like, it is kind of early. But again, like to take that back of what I was trying to say is a lot of people misconstrue PR as advertising, but advertising is you telling someone else that you're good, and PR is getting someone else to tell you that you're good.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully, I think I kind of veered a little left on that, but we can circle back.
So my understanding, I'm not sure if you've completed it yet, but you're working on a kit to help people get podcast interviews, specifically podcast interviews. So let's talk a bit about like how people can approach different forms of getting exposure, so to speak, on different forms of media. So how is something like a podcast interview different from, say, a live show like this or video show? And how is it different from getting featured in Forbes or blog post article? Or, well, are there any other kinds of PR that you know about that I'm not thinking of? Like,
there's
yeah,
so
it's probably
many different
loads, isn't it?
verticals kind of under just what the PR umbrella represents. And I don't mean to throw like a technical term your way, but if you just Google the peso model, you'll kind of understand where PR blends into other forms of media, whether that's advertising, influencer relations, you being a content creator and creating your own content that kind of trends and garnishes and attracts that attention. It's all kind of under the same umbrella as to just media in general. But how I perceive a podcast interview versus, say, a feature or a mention in Forbes, they are connected to a degree, but they are still vastly different. I love things like this, podcast interviews, live shows, just because, I mean, you can put a face to the person. I mean, you can see their mannerisms, you can see their quirks, and like it just really builds that relatability. Whereas if you're looking at Forbes or Entrepreneur or kind of those larger high tier media outlets, it is very kind of, it's heavily focused on the authority and the credibility because people want kind of that global and national recognition. Whereas I don't think one is either or necessarily higher than the other. I think that it all comes down to the story and connection, which is what PR is really. But it just really kind of leads into your thought leadership journey and how you want to really build authority and credibility. And again, starting from the beginning, getting on a live show or getting on social media just to kind of talk with a smaller audience, you will continue to gradually build up to higher tier media opportunities that really kind of are the high tier of the authority piece of the puzzle.
Now, Ashley, you talked about how mindset and confidence is really important in order to showcase you as a thought leader in whatever medium, you want to generate PR for. And, mindset and confidence is, really important in business, never mind, trying to, establish yourself as a thought leader. So what are the tools that you have helped your clients in the past to, build on the confidence that they've got? So let's say that they have your kit, they got the big go ahead to go onto a live show like this or a podcast, and they are nervous. What kind of tips and ideas, and tricks that you can, share with us to, help us with that, with that confidence and that mindset?
Yeah. Just mindset mapping, I think, is very influential in a number of different things. And it doesn't have to be, because I think even hearing the word mindset mapping is like, oh my gosh, I have to really analyze all my thoughts before I go and do this. Yes and no, but I think it's just having a clear understanding of what you want to say and how you want to connect essentially through that conversation, depending on, whatever opportunity it is. And so I think just, again, having kind of bullet pointed notes about what it is that you want to say and then what you're hoping to get out of it. And if it's just solely connection, then just look at it as a connection, kind of take the public side of the conversation out of the equation and just kind of show up to the podcast interview as if you're just talking on the phone with a close friend or a family. I think that's where a lot of people kind of shy away, is they think, oh my gosh, like if I say something wrong, that's just going to be held against me. And it's like, no, because you can kind of feel it out and weed out those environments or those opportunities that it might be not necessarily aligned with you wanting just to show up as a human being having a conversation. So those are just kind of, I think, just more of mental workshopping conversations that I have with my clients. But then it kind of goes into the media training element that it's like, if you do kind of say something that you didn't want to say, or you could have said it a different way, then you do have the capabilities to kind of guide the conversation. I think a lot of people often think that conversations or media conversations have to be just like so structured. And again, just kind of taking yourself down from the cloud and being like, whatever I say in that moment is what was meant to come out. And the person on the receiving end is going to connect with it either way. And you can really guide the conversation based off of your comfort levels.
So let's say, I'm going to use a terrible example because I'll use it. Making has started an alarm clock brand. And you managed to get her you managed to get a feature in Forbes or something, Alarm Clock World. How should she go about? I mean, like, this is a question a lot of business owners have. They get this publicity, then what should they do after that to maximize like the publicity they've already received in the podcast? How do they make the most use of the PR that you're providing them?
Yes, I actually have a blog article around this too that maybe we can put down in the comments after the show just to use as an example. Yeah. But it's basically what to do after you secure media coverage. And a lot of people, I think, get stuck again in the mindset that I have to promote it once and then don't do anything with it. But it's like when we think about content and how to repurpose content, you can repurpose even your media features in a number of different ways. So say, for instance, you were included in a roundup with another like handful of women entrepreneurs or small business owners that are connected within your niche, but you're all talking about a breakthrough statement based off of the topic. Like, you can even create content around the other people who are featured within that roundup, which shows that you're supporting their statements within that piece as well as yours. Because again, I think when we're moving things over to social media and we use social media strictly for audience and community building, like, showing the extra love and support for others kind of included in that piece is still bringing even more recognition to yourself, because you're like, hey, I'm going to scratch your back if you scratch mine, kind of thing. And then, say if you take it from the feature over to social media, if you wanted to hop on stories or do a personalized curated video talking about your experience and being like, oh my gosh, when I started in my entrepreneur or my business journey, not once did I ever think that I would be featured in Forbes, and kind of share that with your audience, because again, it makes yourself relatable to others who are maybe earlier on in their stages, and it gives them hope and aspirations to search for. And then, oh my gosh, you can take it into so many other directions. And then, like, taking it more on like the PR terms, you can put it in your media or your press kit. You can put it up on your website for recognition for others who want to see where your credibility and your authority lives. Put it in your e-newsletter. There's just so many different ways. And again, if you promote it all within a week, all of those little opportunities, you can come back 3 or 4 weeks, if not months later, and kind of repurpose and being like, hey, do you remember when we were featured here? Like, I just wanted to bring the story back because it's relevant. And it's like, if you have new people that are following along, they're going to be like, oh my God, I had no idea that you were featured there. And it kind of, again, circles back and brings more people.
No, I love this, Ashley. It's so useful because I had a tea business. So my name's May King, and I'm on all the socials as Making Tea. Ta-da! And I actually got some media coverage. I was about to be on TV, and I was like proper excited. So I did some social media and saying, oh my God, I'm so excited. And did a few stories about me going down, going into the green room, how I'm nervous, and then of course I went on TV, and then afterwards, I talked about how I felt after TV and all that kind of stuff. And then how Facebook on your personal page, your personal profile, it comes up with fabulous memories. So a year later, it came up with that TV coverage. So I was like, oh my God, I had some TV coverage a year ago, and actually someone contacted me on the memory, of a year back, and said, "Oh, about tea? We need to talk." And that was absolutely fascinating. So from that, 5-minute feature of being on TV and doing all those bits and pieces, I was still able to use that footage a year later and get some, a lead from that. So so thank you for sharing that with us, because I wasn't sure whether that was the right thing to do or not. So yeah.
I love that. And again, like, opportunities are endless at the end of the day. And it's like, you never know really what's going to come out of it if you just have the confidence and the courage just to kind of reshare and repurpose recognition that you're proud of. And that's kind of what thought leadership PR is for me, is it's like, again, taking it back to the bare basics of like, I never thought that I would be even as far along in my journey as I have come. And there's been setbacks and fast forwards and all these like things. But again, that is the relatability of the work. And it's just going to kind of bring others on that journey to know that they can do it too. And I think that that's what lights me up from PR.
So we've talked about the normal side of PR, but obviously part of publicity is dealing with negative comments and negative responses. I mean, ironically, I know you've received negative comments based on the other Ashley Graham, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah, but what's your advice for people dealing with the negative side of publicity? Well, actually, silence is the way. Yeah.
That's a great answer, Ashley. Absolutely amazing answer.
My face says it all. Oh my gosh. Like, I watched a reality show recently. For some reason, I was just in such a reality TV mood over the weekend. Yeah. And they did kind of a recap of the show at the end of the season, talking about the trolls and kind of the hate comments that, members on the show received. And I definitely was like ears peaked when they started talking about this, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, it is inevitable. The more exposure and the more reach that you have, especially if you're chiming in on comments or topics that might be a little kind of triggering for other people, it can be a little uncomfortable for everybody. And this is where I think that just a level of conscious awareness plays a huge factor in how you respond and how you navigate your communications online. And at the end of the day, it does come down to a human trait where it's like, you really don't know what someone else is going through behind the screen when they are kind of chiming in through hateful comments or hate speech, whatever the circumstances may be. And so I always just try to hold a little bit of space and a little bit of grace for other people that I'm like, obviously they're hurting. At the end of the day, it comes into psychology and emotions. Obviously they're hurting. And so just kind of like recognizing that and not letting it be a direct reflection of you, and understanding that they are two vastly different things is, I think, the most important part of that. But then also, like, if you do or are in a position of having to respond and actually having to navigate certain conversations, to make sure that you are, addressing things as they come up. Because I think even those types of comments, hateful, whatever they may be, it gives you a lot of room to also self-reflect on maybe things that you can do differently, and being like, okay, well, obviously I may be hurting my audience or hurting my community in the way that I'm speaking on this. I'm going to take this consideration. That's going to move my communications forward. I'm kind of going off a topic because, again, like, those are never really comfortable situations to be in. But again, when we're talking about just our life journeys in general, let alone thought leadership and moving in different directions, the uncomfortable parts are direct reflections into where you even have room for growth on how to, again, kind of nurture those conversations moving forward. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Yeah, no, it really does, Ashley. I think it's a great question and a great answer. I spotted a footballer who's very famous here in the UK, and he asked a question. And of course, because he's famous, he's obviously going to get loads of trolls. But in asking the question, he answered the people who responded to him positively. and just ignored the ones who were, you know, trolling him. And I thought that was a really interesting approach. So, you know, when you fell silent in response to Tim's question, that reminded me. No, it was a great question though, but that reminded me of Marcus Rashford, because he did exactly the same in effect. You know, he asked a wonderful question, and for everyone who was positive with a great answer, he would respond to them. But with the negative Nellies, he would just ignore them. And I thought that was great. So that was his way of dealing with the trolls, which I thought was fabulous.
I love how you even said they were just like, you know, you paused. And I think when we're talking about conscious communications, and I have like a post that talks about the wheel of authority when it comes to thought leadership and how you communicate or navigate conversations in the digital space that we live in. It is so important to not get immediately emotionally reactive if somebody slides into your DMs with something that is a little bit ill will or toxic or negative. It is important just to kind of sit and reflect and pause and do not speak or respond out of emotion, because then that is just what fuels the ego on both sides. Like, nobody is right or wrong in those environments. But again, like, it is time, or it is important to take time to reflect and pause, to think about, if you feel that you need to respond, make sure that you're responding in a way that's like constructive and aligned versus responding out of ego and frustration and anger and all the other just like emotions that are like, should I really be responding right now? Probably not. I need to take myself out of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's that, like, people make massive typos. I know a few people, and I have to reread what they say a few times because their English is not wonderful. And then I'll take it really badly, and then I'm like, oh, actually, no, they missed a word out there or something, or they used the wrong word. So, yeah, it's very true that you need to kind of pause with any kind of dealings with people on any kind of messenger platform.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like we've used all the questions up, and we are actually about at the end of the interview. I did have an exciting question that I promptly forgot in the typical best thing. I came up with a really interesting question, and now I've forgotten it. So can we finish off by you telling people, like, how can people work with Ashley Graham, the fantastic publicist, the thought leader?
There's so many different ways that you could work with me. Obviously, going into the PR sense, if you needed somebody to act basically as representation or as your catalyst or your mentor on the PR side of pitching, process, all the more technicalities of the PR side, that is the beauty of working with a publicist or a PR agency. But I really take things in another direction on the people relations part of thought leadership, again, where it's coming down to mindset, confidence. And there's a number of different things that I'm working right now, which is the podcast pitching bundle on how to pitch yourself, everything from writing the pitch, pitching, creating your outreach schedule, doing a little bit of media training before you get on that interview. And then once you have that interview or the recording, what to do when you have it, as we talked about. That's kind of something that my fingers are very much in. I'm hoping to launch that within like the next 2 weeks. So it's like definitely some urgency, but I'm also going to be launching, and I don't know if I'm going to do SMS marketing messages or if I'm going to do email, but I am going to be doing conscious messages on the daily or at least weekly on just kind of those thought-provoking questions or just statements that you can reflect on depending on whatever stage you are in your thought leadership journey. And then how you can just remind yourself that, hey, whatever you're doing today, if you just show up for one call or one post, then you did a lot, because that's one post that you didn't do the day before. And so I don't know, I'm really excited about those. And it's kind of like a new evolutional idea that just came a few days ago, but I'm going to be launching that hopefully within the next 2 weeks as well. So
yeah, I remember what the question was. It's actually to do with, because you're running a series where you're interviewing people, including me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your episode just went up today, so I was like, perfect.
I need to find it and like it and do where you ask people one question, So I wonder, could you ask May King that question?
Ooh. How do you own your unique conscious voice as a thought leader in your space?
How do I own it?
Mm-hmm.
Wowzers, what a great question. You've really stumped me now. Yeah.
I don't know if you want some of like the pre kind of back end stuff of why that question exists the way that it does, but there is no right or wrong answer either. Like it is kind of one of those thought provoking questions that is like, well, one, what does a voice mean to me? What does conscious mean to me? What does unique mean? And then, again, there's no right or wrong answer.
So I think that you know, my reason for being in business is to make an impact on that one person with everyone that I meet. Okay, whether they hear what I do, they see a tweet, they see an Instagram story, whether I interview with them, and all the rest of it. And I'm always myself, always. I've always been taught to be myself, because if I can't be myself, it's really hard to be an actor and pretend to be someone else, because you have to keep that act. So I am just myself. Really, I don't know if that really answers the question, but I certainly remember, I think it was something that my mum said, that if you lie and you try and be someone else, then you're going to have to keep up that pretense. And it's a lot harder to keep up that pretense, so just be yourself, So I think that was a lesson that my mum taught me, from a very young age. And so it's just easier, because otherwise you'd have to, keep up the act. So for me, it's easy to be myself, because, it's funny, actually. My dad said to me, don't laugh like that. Because it's ugly. And, how else am I going to laugh? It's me. It's a part of me, and in fact, it's just, it gets people talking, when I do laugh at and what have you. So I respectfully decline to ignore my dad with the way that I laugh, and I'm just myself. So yeah, I think it was my mum who taught me, don't try and pretend to be someone else, because it's so much harder. So because of that, it enables me to be my authentic self everywhere I am, whether it's on social media, whether it's, face to face. And the biggest compliment that I get often, and Tim and I have talked about this, when people come up to me in face to face and say, oh, wow, you're the same person in real life than you are online, because the number of people that Tim and I have met who are the most inauthentic people when you meet them online is quite fascinating. So yeah, I mean, my profile picture is, a photograph that was taken a year ago. It's not when I was 18, and that kind of thing. I've got a double chin. And, I don't look 18 anymore and all the rest of it. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? I don't know. It
does. And I just wanted to say, before Tim hit live, and we were kind of like a little chit-chatting, I was like, oh my God, your laugh is like infectious. I'm one of those people, if I hear a random person on the other side of a room like snort laughing, I'm cracking up, because I'm like, oh my gosh, the sound is just so, in whatever way a laugh comes out, it's just so beautiful that I'm like, and I love to laugh. I feel so disconnected. So, I can listen to your laugh all the time.
Well,
thank you very much.
On that note, and to end the loving that's happening here, thank you, May King, for stepping in at reasonably late notice to be a substitute co-host. And
you're very welcome.
And thank you, Ashley, for so much for being our guest this week. And because of various timings, I have no idea what time or when. The show will go on, but this particular time is going to have to move. So it might be earlier next week. It might be on a different day. Who knows? But that's all part of the fun of live shows. So thanks to everybody who's watching, and everybody who's watching the replay. And we will see you sometime in the future. So thanks a lot, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
this is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.
It's cliche shit, you know.